February 12, 2026, Frankfurt Airport, 6 a.m. 450 flights canceled, 100,000 passengers going nowhere. The departure board looks like a system failure. Gate agents overwhelmed, phones ringing with no answer. 1 month later, March 12, 2026, same airport, same scene. 191 more cancellations. 521 flights grounded across Germany in a single day. And here's the part nobody is telling you. This isn't bad luck. It isn't weather. It isn't a surprise. This is the slow-motion collapse of Europe's most important aviation hub, happening in plain sight, driven by one airline that controls the airport so completely it cannot fail without taking the entire system down with it. Frankfurt isn't just Germany's biggest airport. It is the connecting spine of European aviation, the hub that links continents, the airport where one airline's problems become everybody's problem. And right now, that airline has a very serious problem. To understand the crisis, you need to understand the structure. Frankfurt Airport, officially Frankfurt am Main, IATA code FRA, is Europe's third busiest airport. 65 million passengers per year, 100 airlines, connections to over 300 destinations worldwide. But here's the number that changes everything. Lufthansa controls more than 50% of all seat capacity at Frankfurt. More than half. Every second passenger moving through that airport is on a Lufthansa group flight. That's not a hub strategy. That's a monopoly dressed in airline clothes. The comparison to Atlanta and Delta is almost perfect. Delta controls around 75% of Hartsfield-Jackson. Lufthansa controls Frankfurt the same way. Not quite as total, but structurally identical. One carrier so dominant that the airport's entire connecting network depends on their schedule, their reliability, and their labor peace. At Atlanta, when Delta has a good operational day, Atlanta has a good operational day. When Delta has a strike, Atlanta has a crisis. Frankfurt and Lufthansa work the same way. And Lufthansa right now is in the middle of a labor war that shows no sign of ending. The Vereinigung Cockpit Union, which represents Lufthansa's pilots, called a 24-hour strike on February 12th. Then another 2-day strike on March 12th and 13. The pilots voted 95.5% in favor of industrial action in September 2025. Cabin crew union UFO joined the February action, and Lufthansa City Line pilots, who operate crucial feeder flights into Frankfurt from regional airports, voted 99% in favor of strikes. 99%. That is not a union sending a warning signal. That is an entire workforce telling management the relationship is broken.
The surface issue is pensions, but the real story goes deeper than that. For years, Lufthansa offered its pilots a defined benefit pension, a guaranteed monthly payment in retirement regardless of market performance. It's expensive for the airline to fund, and in 2024, Lufthansa management decided they couldn't sustain it. They proposed switching to a contribution-based model. The airline pays into a fund, and whatever that fund earns is what pilots get. The risk shifts entirely onto the employee. In an era of inflation and market volatility, pilots looked at that offer and saw their retirement security being stripped away to protect the airline's profit margin. The union's position: we already accepted pay cuts during COVID to keep this airline flying. You came back to us profitable, then immediately asked us to take another hit. That's not a partnership. Lufthansa management's position: the cost structure at the core Lufthansa brand is unsustainable. Jens Ritter, CEO of Lufthansa Airlines, the core brand within the group, stated publicly that without structural changes, there are no long-term prospects for Lufthansa Airlines. That is a CEO telling his own airline's employees that the company is not viable in its current form. Here's the context that makes that statement extraordinary. The Lufthansa Group, which includes Swiss, Austrian Airlines, Brussels Airlines, Eurowings, ITA Airways, and others, reported record revenue of $39.6 billion in 2025, with $2 billion operating profit. The group made money. The problem is which part of the group made it. Swiss, Lufthansa's Swiss subsidiary, is roughly 10 times more profitable per passenger than Lufthansa Airlines itself. Austrian Airlines outperforms the core brand. Eurowings, the budget arm, is growing faster. The flagship airline, the one with Lufthansa written on the tail, the one that controls Frankfurt, is the least profitable airline in the group it nominally leads. And the solution management has landed on is to cut costs at the core brand, reduce domestic routes by approximately 100 weekly flights from summer 2026, outsource more functions to cheaper subsidiaries, and restructure pensions. Every one of those moves hits the pilots who fly the Frankfurt hub. So when those pilots strike, they don't just inconvenience passengers, they paralyze the most important connecting hub in continental Europe. Frankfurt's vulnerability isn't just Lufthansa's labor problems, it's structural, and it goes back to how the airport was designed to work. Frankfurt is a connecting machine. Approximately 55% of passengers at Frankfurt are not originating or ending their journey there. They are connecting. They landed from somewhere and they are leaving to somewhere else. The airport's entire layout, terminal design, and scheduling logic exists to move those connecting passengers efficiently. That works beautifully when everything runs on time. It becomes catastrophic when it doesn't. Lufthansa's minimum connecting time at Frankfurt, the minimum gap you need between arriving and departing flights to successfully transfer, was increased in March 2025 to 60 minutes. That change alone tells you something important. The airport was already struggling to process connections at the previous minimum. Transfers were being missed, bags were going missing, passengers were being stranded. The solution was to build more buffer time into the schedule. 60 minutes is generous for European hub standards. Schiphol and Heathrow both offer tighter connections. The fact that Frankfurt needed to extend its minimum is an admission that the system was being stretched beyond reliable operating capacity. Add a strike into that environment. Lufthansa canceled 450 of 1,117 scheduled Frankfurt flights on February 12th alone, 40% of the entire day's operation. That's not just the passengers on those canceled flights who were stranded, it's the connecting passengers whose feeder flights disappeared. It's the long-haul passengers at other airports whose onward connections from Frankfurt no longer exist. It's the crew members who were supposed to operate a plane that is now 3 countries away. In February's single strike day, air traffic control fees at Frankfurt, already up 19% year over year, processed a fraction of their normal traffic while still collecting fixed costs. Ground handling staff, gate agents, and baggage crews showed up to an airport running at 60% capacity, while fixed infrastructure costs didn't shrink by a single euro. The passengers? They were told to rebook, or wait, or find another way.
Here's the question you're probably asking right now. If Lufthansa is this unreliable at Frankfurt, why don't passengers just switch to another airline? Some do, and that pressure is real. Ryanair and EasyJet have been growing at secondary German airports for years. Budget carriers now serve Berlin-Brandenburg, Cologne-Bonn, Dusseldorf, and Hamburg with aggressive pricing. But for the specific type of travel Frankfurt exists to serve, intercontinental connections, long-haul business routes, the passenger flying from a European regional city to New York or Tokyo via Frankfurt, there is no low-cost alternative that replicates what Lufthansa's hub does. You cannot connect Hamburg to Singapore on a Ryanair flight via Stansted at a competitive schedule. The hub-and-spoke model that Frankfurt runs requires a carrier large enough with a network wide enough to make those connections work. Lufthansa's Frankfurt network includes over 300 destinations with coordinated wave departures designed to minimize connection times. No other European airline operates at Frankfurt's scale, which means passengers who need those connections are, structurally, dependent on Lufthansa in a way that gives them almost no leverage. You can complain. You can claim EU 261 compensation, up to 600 euros per passenger for cancellations, and Lufthansa paid 47 million euros in compensation in Q1 2025 alone. down 52% from the year before only because 2024 was even worse. But you cannot easily route around them. Meanwhile, Lufthansa's stock fell more than 9% in the 7 trading sessions following its 2025 results announcement in early March 2026. Not because the results were bad, they showed the strongest operational performance in a decade, but because analysts see what's coming. Unresolved labor disputes, domestic capacity cuts, structural cost problems at the core brand, and a pilot workforce that voted 95% in favor of more strikes. The market is pricing in more disruption. It usually knows something. Here's the full picture. Frankfurt is Europe's connecting hub. Half its passengers are in transit. The airport's entire operating logic depends on one airline running reliably. That airline is Lufthansa. Lufthansa controls Frankfurt the way Delta controls Atlanta. But unlike Delta, which has spent years becoming one of the most operationally consistent airlines in the world, Lufthansa's core brand is its own group's least profitable airline. Its pilots are in an unresolved war over pensions, its cabin crew struck alongside them, its regional subsidiary pilots voted 99% for industrial action. 2 strikes hit Frankfurt in February and March 2026 alone, canceling over 1,200 flights between them and stranding hundreds of thousands of passengers. The structural fix, cutting domestic routes, outsourcing to cheaper subsidiaries, restructuring pensions, makes the financial logic better and the labor situation worse simultaneously. There is no obvious resolution that satisfies both. Frankfurt is not broken, not yet. When the strikes end, operations normalize. Lufthansa had its best operational summer in a decade in 2025. The potential is clearly there. But the combination of labor fragility, structural cost pressure, connecting hub dependence, and a stock market that just knocked 9% off the share price in a week tells you the same thing the departure board told those 100,000 stranded passengers in February. The system works, until it doesn't. And when it doesn't, there is no backup plan.